kind of lame. I'm very grateful you're here, because unlike many of my colleagues, I have no expectations of you, and that's quite true. Wow. How long did it take you to make that? Did you make it, or did someone make it for you?
I made it.
Why?
Because he's my favorite.
Okay. I'm impressed and also depressed. Do I need this?
No.
Do you need this from me, for you?
Nope.
You're good?
Yep.
It's going to be on my permanent record. You're going to shame me on YouTube before I die, and then after I die, it'll be used as an indictment against my career, because that's what it's all about. Who's it reserved for? Someone emotionally crippled? Or for you? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. I'm Howard Chaykin. Some of you who here know me. Some of you who are children should not be here. If you've got kids here and then you feel that they're delicate sensibility, you're going to regret raising them this way, I'd leave now. I do not edit my comments for children. I have grandchildren, and they know this too. As I told someone earlier, my wife slugged me when my 9-year-old granddaughter, being driven away from our house by her mother, leaned out of the car and yelled, "I'm going to come back and club you like a baby seal." And my wife asked me, why do you teach them this? And it's because I can. I said earlier that I don't take you for granted, and that's quite true. I don't know if there's any one thread. I mean, I'm someone who's perfectly comfortable speaking in front of a group of people who don't know me, as well as a group of people who do. The knowing is an interesting part. For me, Larry Hama raised an issue about a year ago on Facebook. What do you say to someone who comes up to your table at a convention and asks you who you are and what you do? And I said, what I say is none of your business. And that if you go talk to someone else, ask them who I am, if you care to. And if they tell you something that interests you, come back and talk to me. I find self-promotion shaming. Those of you who've been to my table know that I have no banner. It's sort of like, I'm not really comfortable with the idea of telling you who I am and why. I know who I am, and I'm pretty comfortable with who I am. You leaving? I'm not holding you here, I'm just asking.
I'm leaving for a few minutes.
Okay, there'll be a test. Just curious, I'm not judging him. No, it's okay. I don't really depend on your attention, because if I did, I'd kill myself. So, I've been working in comic books. It'll be 50 years this year. I started my career as an assistant, an apprentice, a gopher, talent-free, utterly without skills, and was lucky enough to fall under the thrall of a man who I discovered some years later had exactly the same experience, i.e. talentless and equipped only with hunger and blind rage. Many of you have known me for some time, you've heard this before, and I don't say this ironically or comically, I'm quite serious. The reason I'm 69 and still working professionally, if not competitively, is that I did learn how to do this. I was not born with any skill sets. All I was born with was a desire. I don't care, and have not cared for many years, about the content of comic books, which puts me at odds with the vast percentage of people who make comics, read comics, and publish comics. The comic book companies have convinced you, the audience, that the talent, that the material is the brand, that the characters they publish are the brand. There will be a test if you're coming back, and if you're not, we won't talk about you in your absence. It's okay, you know. But I believe that the talent is the brand, but you have been convinced by the companies that the people who produce work that feature characters dressed as this woman is dressed is the brand. And that, for me, is the key seminal problem with American comic books. Now, one of the issues with that is the utter frivolousness and irrelevance of what we do. The great thing about comics is that they are a frivolous, irrelevant medium that is very difficult to do well. How fucking nuts is that, right? You know, that's crazy. And on top of which, we live in an apocalyptic time in the history of our country and our planet. And it's very difficult for me to move past my own terror at a future and to address the issues that are my day-to-day experience of sitting down at my desk at 9 o'clock in the morning. Back, I was worried to sit down and draw comic books for a living. Now, I am really lucky. I'm deeply blessed. And as I say, I take nothing for granted. I have a career and I have a set of skills that continue to serve me. And what I love about comics is the form of comics. See, he came back to take them with him. Why were you here in the first place? Needed a place to sit, didn't you?
We were told that Tom King and Mr. Rock were going to be in this room.
Different room.
Different room. And Tom King hates you. He just won't tell you that truth. Have a great time.
Sorry, we didn't mean to.
I don't really give a fuck. It's okay. I'm serious. As I said earlier, you see early remark, what do you think of me is of no interest in me. But keep going, keep going. What? What?
You're in rare form today.
No, I mean, this is the way I always am. I mean, that somebody referred to me as a curmudgeon about a year ago, and I took great exception to this. Who in this room is over the age of 60? When someone calls you a curmudgeon, tell them to go fuck themselves. Rather, you're a contrarian. Curmudgeon is an ageist description that is just as shaming and just as offensive as anything sexist or racist might be. It's a means by which young people make you irrelevant. You're a man of experience and a contrary nature. And I should explain that I've been like this since I was a kid. The difference is that I now have it's like that old song, you know, that Texas slogan, you know, old hat, no cattle. Well, I now have the hat, the cattle, and the guns. I can back up everything I say by experience and by skill set. So, reject the concept of curmudgeon. It's a means to diminish you as a person, you know? So fuck that shit, okay? So, I'm an old man. I'm an old man in a boy's business. I've been thinking a lot about, and by the way, if you have any questions or want to interrupt me, please do, because I am a man who likes talking and hearing my own voice. And I do it well. You know, I'm pretty good. You know, today Francis Ford Coppola joined Martin Scorsese in his distaste for comic book movies. Why would you give a shit? Why would you bother defending your tastes? Does it matter what he thinks of you? Clearly it does. And what that does, that clearly indicates an insecurity about the taste of the people who are defending the material that he's dismissing. This goes right back to a comic book sensibility, which is a mistaking the concept of best, of favorite for best. Just because you like something doesn't mean it's good. Just because you like something doesn't give it an imprimatur of quality. You are entitled to like what you like, but don't presume that it's any good because you like it. Oh, it's the best. No, you like it a lot. You know, my favorite saxophone player is a man who's been dead since 1959. You know, my favorite rock and roll band only has 2 men surviving of it. My favorite rock and roll singer is a 71-year-old Irishman who most people haven't really heard of, except that they went to weddings or used one of his songs. You know, so best is irrelevant. It is completely subjective. Being the best comic book artist is like being the world's tallest midget. Who are you competing against, really? You know. So all this stuff about attacking these guys brings to mind that old trope about comic books aren't for kids. Unfortunately, Scorsese and Coppola aren't really wrong, because what they're dismissing, what they're sneering down their nose at, is allegedly adult product featuring characters, concepts, ethos, and themes which were created by children for children 80 years ago. And simply slathering gravitas on this stuff doesn't make it any better. It's the equivalent, it's no less absurd than if I optioned the rights to Curious George and sent Curious George and the Man in the Yellow Hat back to Africa to fight the Ebola epidemic. It's no less absurd than that. But what? You're disagreeing, agreeing, or considering the possibilities of doing that for a living. You're going to do that? You're going to option trade Curious George? Don't do it. Trust me. I'm ahead of you on that one. You're also talking about a medium in which the primary franchise, the paradigm, the narrative paradigm, has a deep and committed relationship to Chuck Jones's Roadrunner Coyote cartoons. Recently there was a piece on Facebook about Clark Kent going to reveal his secret identity. You know that's not going to stay the same. Characters die and then come back, so there's no closure. And so, the justification and the insistence that they're modern myths ignores the fact that myths remain fairy tales for children. And that at a certain point, we should, as a culture and a society, put aside childish things. I love the form of comics. I truly do. I love the challenges given to me on a daily basis by a blank page, and the capacity of finding a way to convey narrative in those pictures. But I also recognize that the standards that I have for what is good, what is bad, what is favorite, what is best, what works for me, which does not work for me, rarely has any relationship to the standards that most enthusiasts bring to the table, and many of my colleagues as well. I have an assistant. I have a number of assistants. I have an assistant who came to work for me a number of years ago, who I did not do to him what my boss did to me when I was his age, much younger actually. Gil Kane once asked me who my favorites were, and I told him, and he dismissed every single one of them with epithets that were hysterically funny, which I could not share with a mixed audience. And when my assistant, Calvin is his name, told me who he liked, I said, what you're talking about is something that is pretty and superficial and has no narrative value. And he earnestly insisted that pretty was valid. Pretty is not valid. Okay. I spent 6 years teaching seminars at Marvel to young guys who were on contract for Marvel, who they felt were not delivering work to the potential that they'd had when they showed up. And the first day of the seminar consisted of me yelling at them, explaining to these young guys that no matter how much of an asshole you think you can get away with being, every time you behave like an asshole as an artist, you're making a writer feel better about himself and using you like a tool. And that once you start taking a check from a company, you're a corporate con. If you don't want to do this, do independent comics and do what you want to do. But if you're working for Marvel Comics, if you're working for DC Comics, you're a member of a corporate enterprise. And you're no longer a hobbyist sitting at your mother's dining room table in the middle of the night while everybody else is sleeping, drawing comics on a cutting board. That you're part of a corporate enterprise. The next day was discussing the language of comics. This past Sunday, last Sunday, there was a piece in the New York Times by a woman who I don't know, talking about being an expert in comics. And this shit made my head explode. Because whoever this person is had absolutely no idea of what comics are. It was a statement of the rampant amateurism of the world in which we live. It made garage bands look professional and studied and schooled. So I grew up with the idea that I could seek virtuosity, but I was dismissed with this, that virtuosity no longer had any context. And this was explained to me by someone who was much younger than me, that it was a discussion of hip-hop, and I dismissed the idea of sampling. And someone said that sampling was the same as bebop solos. And I say, but those are made in the moment. They're not made with a knife. In those days, it was a knife on tape. And we live in a culture that no longer acknowledges the existence of history. And I'm a guy who stands on the shoulders of giants. I learned my craft working for other people. And I love the idea that we have an enormous history of our field. I'm doing a book now that's a tribute to those guys called Hey Kids Comics. Anybody read Hey Kids Comics? Wow. Thanks for supporting me commercially, really. You know, it's really good. Lies. You guys, the rest of you, so, one of the things that I have in common with Gil Kane is that I have the courage to be disliked. The comic book business is a perfect microcosm of modern culture. And the comic book business is packed with people who are very nice but not particularly good. But most comic book fans, and many comic books professionals, are willing to accept niceness in lieu of good. because superficiality is the tone of the times. And I'm not particularly nice. I said to someone earlier today that I am situationally kind. And it served me well. You know, I recognize the fact that I'm the architect of my own adversity, but I've created the problems that I have to solve. But there is a certain element of wonderment that at my age, there are fewer and fewer people out here in the margins with me. I described myself earlier today as being the most influential and visible figure in the comic book business. And it's true. The great irony of 2017 was that I was attacked by a number of people who had not read a book that they were attacking, but presumed on the basis of their own belief systems, their own opinions, having no idea who I was, that I was saying things that I was not saying. And that they had a right to attack and destroy the character and career of someone they didn't know. And that further, the level of self-righteousness attached to this was so deep and so profound as to be almost childlike in its charm.
Is that Hysteria?
Yes. I did a book called The Divided States of Hysteria, which is about the next successful terrorist attack in the United States. And in the course of the first issue, I introduced a number of people. One of the characters is a transgender woman who, had these people read the book, had they stayed with the book, would have discovered that by the middle of the book and toward the end of the book, this character became the moral focus of the book, the moral compass of the book, and the heroine of the book, in an uneasy but romantic and sexual relationship with a hero who had previously behaved in an entirely heterosexual manner. But the hysteria and frenzy attached to popular opinion got in the way. And I recognize, unfortunately, the choices that I've made professionally have isolated me from contemporary culture in the context of comics. And I still love comics enormously, but I don't read comics. I derive the same pleasure from comics that I used to read from reading them at one time, from doing them. And I really love the idea of sitting down at my desk at 9:15 every morning and having a page in front of me to work on. I truly do. The pleasure I derive from making comics is deep and profound. Can I ask any of you, please, some of you, to talk to me? Ask me a question. Interrupt me, please. Come on, you.
You're going to do another Divided States?
I've written it. The problem is that history, the world in which we live, is accelerating so rapidly that thematically, the second arc, which is called either Treason or Oligarchs, which is about the end of Western civilization and no one notices because we're distracted by our cell phones, is being overtaken by actual history. We are living in a time that is so not normal as to be shocking to me. I never intended to live long enough to find myself in a YA dystopic novel fiction that I would never read. And someone said to me earlier, you've written a blues song. And it boils down to the fact that those of us on the left are weak, and those of us on the right are out to basically take us to a level of rapture. I'm an atheist, profoundly, without belief, and that's potentially one of the reasons why I reject superhero comic books. Some years back, I had a conversation with Sergio Aragonés when the movie Cocoon came out, and both of us revealed to a surprise group of people who were just loving it, how much we hated it. We hated it for the same reason, because it was about needing someone to come from outside to save us. And I believe the narrative of the world in which we live has been diminished to a world of heroes and villains, of seeking out, people who will behave in gloriously Shakespearean and operatic ways to protect us. And I think that's just ridiculous. I do. I think, and the narrative of the sequel is about that collapse, and it's about an ongoing battle for resources between two sets of oligarchs, one on the left and one on the right. And there was a piece in the New Statesman, I think, recently, about a year ago, about a guy who had been called for a meeting as a futurist, and called to a meeting of billionaires, asking them, and the big question they had was, how can we control our employees after money ceases to have value when the world collapses? Which was a question I had in the context of this book, because that's what it's about. How do you do it? You plant a chip in them that'll explode if they fuck with you. This money will have no value. How do you do it? And I finally came down to one side controls with technology and one side controls with Jesus. That we have one of the oligarchs is part of a totalitarian Christ-based franchise. And I've come to believe that that would be enough to maintain control. But the reality is, the world is moving so fast that I'm not sure this book has any relevance anymore. I just don't, you know. And also I'm old, you know. And frankly, I got really tired of having collateral damage aimed at my publisher for attacks on me. It seemed unfair to them. I'm volatile, and I'm a lightning rod. And I'm just not interested in hurting anybody's feelings who doesn't deserve to be hurt. Someone else? Yes, sir.
Your process. Sometimes your work, you have writers, and then it seems like a lot of your independent work now, you're doing the writing yourself. Do you see yourself ever doing work for someone writing for you again, or are you going to primarily be doing work that you do the writing for, or what do you see?
What I've got on my book right now is I'm working on the second arc of Hey Kids Comics, which is something I've written and drawn. And I write it as a writer. I write a full script because I don't deliver pencils. Because if someone hires me to do a book, they don't know how to get some idea what they're going to be getting from me, then they shouldn't be hiring me. I'm writing and drawing a piece for Marvel that I'm waiting for response to the first draft of the script. But I'm also in negotiation to do a huge project for a European company that I will not write, that I will draw. That will be an experiment for me. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how it will play out, if it happens. And I'm happier writing and drawing my own stuff. When I write for other people, my scripts are the same that I write for myself and for others. My scripts concern themselves with panel size, panel shape, and depth of field, because most writers have no real understanding of the real estate of the page. Comic book page is actually fairly small. If you accept, as I do, that in comics, space represents time, the amount of time you allot to an action in an image is directly related, the amount of space rather, is directly related to the amount of time involved in the action depicted. Make sense? Yes? Okay. And when called upon to draw someone else's script, most writers don't understand that a page has to have narrative value and also be beautiful in a subjective sense. There has to be beauty there, okay? And beauty is obviously a completely subjective idea. Unfortunately, most writers view artists as delivery systems for their text, just as they view letterers as delivery systems for their text. And since when you react to the writing in a comic book, what you're actually reacting to is the execution of the artist's execution of the writer's text. Follow? Mm-hmm. Make sense? Because most writers don't really address the idea of body language, character action, deep space, establishment. How do these characters relate to the world in which they exist? They look at comics as simply an extension of the literary ideas. When in the past I have worked with other writers, and for example, when I've worked with Brian or with Matt, the story that I tell on each page is a story they have asked me to tell, but it's not told in the pattern in which they have presented it to me to tell. I frequently find writers writing at me, attempting to do sort of the equivalent of fan fiction. And I prefer to take that material and dismantle it and remantle it, if you will, into an identifiable, organized pattern. This past September, I did a lecture at C3 in Long Beach where I talked about the 5 basic panels, the paradigm of the comic book page. And apparently it went off very well. And it's a very shortened version of the seminar, part of the seminar that I taught at Marvel for those years. And I was called last week and asked if I could do it again, but with a different franchise and a different format. And I have a different idea to do it. Because one of the things that I'm most interested in is the whys of a page. Why is that? Why horizontals? Why verticals? Why multiple panels? Why are those panels all the same size? Why are all those panels of different size? What does that negative space mean? The amateur nature of most people making comics on the independent level is a demonstration of the fact that people have lost sight that there actually is a language to what we do. There really is. It's not, and half of the work done in those Marvel seminars for all those years was disabusing these people of the arbitrary, accidental nature of the page. That there should be a reason why those panels are that size. You know, these are more important than drawing. You know, one of the things that drives me nuts is the adoration laid on phenomenal draftsmen while paying no attention to people who actually know how to tell a story and narrative and do the job that comic books ask for. Okay? Dave Stevens was an extraordinarily good draftsman, but as a comic book artist, he bored the living shit out of me. Okay? Whereas Lionel Yu and Eduardo Riso can draw pretty well as well. Those guys know how to make a fucking comic book page. They make a page that feels like a unit. That it's organized in a way that has beauty. That beauty is subjective, yes. But it is beauty. Someone else? Yes?
When you were doing the Marvel seminars, was there a trend of, I guess, mistakes that the artists were doing that you had to correct?
How do you mean?
I don't know if there was something they were bringing to the process that was just wrong.
Well, to a certain extent, I'm going to come around to your answer in a back way, if you will. Okay. One of the reasons why we find ourselves working in a visually narrative medium in which the writers are the alphas, which makes no sense if you think about it, is one of the reasons is the 90s. Okay. The 90s comics were about nothing but visual sensibility. They had no narrative whatsoever. The most successful comics in the 90s were pastiches of material that had been done by Marvel. They were basically, you know, variations on a theme. Okay, endless X-Men concepts, and those pages rarely had narrative value. For the most part, they were explosive, bombastic, aimed at fan service to an audience of mostly boys and laddies who were interested in adolescent power fantasies and weirdly sexualized female bodies that looked far more like transvestites than actual women. That holdover, that informs so much of the training ground of the guys who came into the business in the teens and aughts. Okay? Okay. These guys had to be untaught that sensationalism. Okay? They had to figure out a way to get past that bombast while maintaining an exciting set of visual imageries, but at the same time organizing the page in a way that, again, had that subjective beauty. Much of the work we did was adjusting these people from the approximate to the specific. Whenever you see a page where there's almost a hole cut out in a panel, where there's two horizontal panels and one of them bumps up in that guy wasn't paying attention to what he was doing in the first place. He started drawing before he finished thinking. Okay? And my colleague and I, who I participated in the first half of those seminars and then did it alone, were committed to explaining to these people that you shouldn't put a single fucking drawing down on a page that didn't have intent, that didn't have a reason behind it, that didn't need to be defended. Okay? Most of the mistakes made were based on an arbitrary placement of images, an arbitrary non-choice, but just, that panel, that'll be that size approximately. There's a reason we have rulers with inches marked out on them, and they serve well. You know, the aspect ratio of a comic book page is approximately 2:3. You know what an aspect ratio is?
No.
Who doesn't know what an aspect ratio is? Okay. A movie screen has an aspect ratio. There's no water here. It's the relationship between the height and the width. Okay. Comic book page is 2:3. Okay. It's 2 inches by 3 inches, and upgrade it up, okay? And using that space effectively in the name of narrative. Thank you. You are a prince. Thanks, man. And the guy, and you know, see, somebody appreciates old people, okay? Another old person, there you go. Or a semi-old person, there you go. But certainly not a curmudgeon. He's not bringing it to me, he's getting it himself. Son of a bitch. I thought he was bringing me water. Can you dig that shit? No, Robert, give me some water. Be a young guy. Thank you, man. What's that?
I think it may be out.
Oh, it's empty?
Looks like it. So you may have gotten it.
Sons of bitches.
There's another one that's
It's all right. What? Fuck it. Who cares? I'll live. You know. Come on. I mean, if I haven't made it this long, I'll make it. Is there one over there? Thank you. Look at that. Am I worthy? The answer is yes. Yes. Thank you. It's a rhetorical question, nonetheless. Does that help your question? Does that answer it at all?
Yes.
Okay. The single greatest problem remains the arbitrary nature of imagery. That it's got to be exact. Somebody came across. Hey, thanks, man. I'll take that one too. I'm old. I need as much as I can. I need to hydrate. Thanks. Look at this. I am the girlfriend of the whirling dervish, baby. One.
Shots.
It was Neil Adams who first insisted that the most important thing you can do on a page is be able to know exactly why you chose to frame the image you've chosen to frame. And most of the work that's done by young people in comics mostly derives from what they feel like drawing and what they feel safest in drawing. If I'm working with a writer and they ask me what I feel like drawing, I realize I'm in the hands of someone who's a dilettante, who doesn't really care about his job. If he's willing to accommodate that, what I feel like drawing, he's not serious about his work. Okay? He's looking to accommodate me, treat me like an idiot. Because only an idiot would choose to draw only what he feels like drawing. That's kid stuff. That's amateur bullshit. Do you follow me?
Yes.
Okay. Someone else? Robert?
So you talk a lot about the amateur nature of comics, but isn't that like the wonderful thing about it? Is like
No, it's not.
The amorphous wall between fans and creators? And
I think that wall should be really tight. I really do. I loathe the desperate need for fan service. I think it's a diminishing aspect of the form. I think the reason for conventions is for people to meet.
Yeah.
But I think the wall should exist. I mean, for example, I don't believe that that people who cosplay are a member of a professional creative cast that has anything to do with me. You know, dressing up like a comic book character does not grant you an imprimatur of equality to me. Making a comic book, all that means is you made a comic book. Making a good comic book, making a clever comic book, making a well-received comic book, making a well-made comic book. These are all very different things. They're different plateaus. All comic book artists start out as talented amateurs, or at least amateurs. The idea is to move on to a professional level, to leave behind amateur thoughts and an amateur skill set in the service of amateur ideas. We expand, okay? The comic book medium is unfortunately trapped in perpetual adolescence. And adolescence encourages amateurism. And there's a dismissal of professionalism and virtuosity by a number of generations who are too fucking lazy to learn to be professional, to develop virtuosity, to develop a skill set that serves the material better. And the problem, of course, is the material that you're serving is usually such outright junk that there's no particular reason to improve your skill set to draw Supergirl better. You know, it just doesn't matter very much. You know, and that is the great Mobius strip of the work we do. The skill sets are just good enough to draw material that is just stupid enough for an audience that is willing to be infantilized enough to accept this material as acceptable enough. You know, I've always said that when the Comics Code Authority infantilized the comic book publishing business, it also infantilized the audience. It drove away people who were interested in more challenging material. Where are the people who read Johnny Craig's shock suspense stories, or crime suspense stories, or Kurtzman's war books? And they emerged again, you know, 7 years later with the Undergrounds. But oddly enough, almost all of them were guys who were doing their versions of Mad. You know, Justin Green, Bill Griffith, Crumb, of course. These guys were all heavily influenced by Kurtzman. There were very few people who saw any interest in doing adult material that reflected the war books, the crime books, the liberal hysteria books of shock suspense. And Jack Jackson, Corbin, Rand Holmes, but very few. Okay, Spain to a certain extent. But linear, straightforward, dramatic narrative had vanished. All that was left was genre material. And the genre was always superhero comics. I mean, people wonder, what happened to romance comics? What happened to romance comics was superhero comics. What happened was that older guys, the guys who were retiring were leaving the business, and the guys who were coming to fill editorial slots didn't like women very much. They didn't understand women very much. They didn't get girls. And they basically, they let romance comics die because they didn't understand the franchise. They didn't like the idea of sharing the world with women who made them feel uncomfortable about themselves and their tastes. Wait a second.
With the idea of not liking women, what do you feel about I guess the Me Too movement that maybe has happened and passed?
That's not liking women. That's like chasing sex. It's two very different ideas. I've been married a lot. Okay, I married early and often, like Democrats voting in Chicago, and and you know, I mean, and I was much better looking when I was younger. So you know, and I had this same rap. I mean, look, I've been this guy since I was. I mean, my first job at 16 was verifying Life magazine subscriptions on the phone, and I had this voice. So I had a voice of authority, and I was this little fat fuck who was like, you know, like that. But by the time I hit my 20s, you know, I was fully formed, you know, and I had an attitude. I was fearless, and I had, you know, no issues with rejection. So I just threw myself into the world. So, and I'm one of the rare guys in my generation of comics who was born and raised in New York. So I had a ready-made friend base. I had, you know, I had women, you know, I had friends. I had a romantic life. I had a sexual life. But most of these guys were socially retarded and limited in interest and scope, and for the most part incapable of having intimate relationships with men, let alone other people and women. They learned how to be friends in their 20s from the relationships we had as colleagues. But many of them were very uncomfortable with anything other than the kind of comic books they read. I'm one of the very few guys in my generation who actually did romance comics. They sucked. They were terrible. But I really liked the idea of romance comics. I was having breakfast with a colleague this morning, and I said that my favorite work by the artist Gray Morrow was the work that he did for Dorothy Woolfolk at DC Comics on the Love books. They were great. Robert Kanigher, who was an absolute scumbag, a loathsome moral cripple whom I'm hoping is spitting on a rotisserie in hell, did a you know, parody Dorothy Woolfolk in one of his Wonder Woman books in this crass and shitty way that was very typical of that generation. One of the things I'm trying to do with Hate Kids Comics is indicate that there were women around there. That women were there. There were women drawing comics. You know, women writing comics. The writer Patricia Highsmith, the woman who wrote Ripley, worked for Stan in the late 40s and early 50s. Okay? Lily Renee, Tarpe Mills, you know, Ramona Fradon. Okay? These people did really important work. And black artists, Puerto Rican artists, Asian artists, you know, surrounded by a bunch of Jews like me, you know. So I abhor amateurism. The function of amateurism is to be put behind you when you become a professional. What is that face you're making, man?
No.
Just you're giving me the look.
No, just absorbing what you're saying.
Robert is one of my favorite people. He's a pisser. He cracks me up. Yes?
You're working on Hate Kids Comics and other art, maybe next year?
Yeah. Issue 6 is delivered. Issue 7 is being... I should explain my process. I work with the same guys all the time because I know what I've got. And my letterer is a guy named Ken Bruzenek. He's a guy I've known since I'm 22. He's a year younger than me. I was working for Neil, he was working for Steranko. We hated each other the minute we met. We're just like, get the fuck out of here. I hate you so much. We literally just hated each other. 10 years later, I'm looking for a letterer, and Joe Duffy at Marvel says, I know this guy. I know him. We meet, and we're like, God, I love you. Wow. And we've been asshole buddies ever since. We are twin sons of different mothers. The difference is, I can talk like this, and people forget it. They think I'm kidding. Ken says this, and people hate him. He has burned more bridges behind him than Robert Moses tried to tear apart. You know, he's just a monster. But Ken and I have worked out it since we've been working together on the work we do for Image. Ken now letters into color. Now, most of the process we letter first and then color. But Ken prefers to take a colored page and letter it so that he can use his art director skill sets to manifest effects with the color, with the lettering, using the color to support those effects. So he's lettering issue 7 right now. Issue 8 rather, that first of 8 is in my colorist hands. Those of you who haven't read the first arc of Hey Kids, and there is shame in that and remorse that I am at you, it's about the Silver Age. It follows the adventures of 3 people, two men and a woman, and who meet at the end of after the Second World War and find that the comic book business has changed dramatically since they've been in the service. And they scramble to catch up. And each book takes place in 1945, 55, 65, and 2001. And each 2001 6-page sequence is about a memorial, about death, and about the reaction to that death. And it's all anecdotal, and it's got a cold opening in the first issue and a coda in the 5th that tie together and really tie a knot on bitterness. Okay. The second arc is about my generation and the impact on my generation of EC. My generation was too young to have read EC when we were kids, but we discovered it all in the early 60s in those paperbacks that were republished, the black and whites, and it transformed us. One of the things you guys may not understand is that my generation believed 2 things. A, that we were the last generation of comic book talent, because paper was going to disappear with the advent of personal computers. We didn't understand the concept of recycling. We assumed that everything would be digital, because we believed Isaac Asimov, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And 2, we believed we would outlive superhero comic books. Because none of us, with very few exceptions, were vaguely interested in doing superhero stuff. And we believed that superhero comics were things that were drawn by our parents' generation. Because Stan, no matter what you may think, Stan, all of his college guys, Stan hated kids. He liked hanging out with people his own age. He didn't have any interest in anybody younger than him. And Stan's great gift before Jack came along was that he was supposed to have done the best imitations of Kurtzman's war books ever. By the time Stan came along, Jack came along. Jack saved Stan's life, just invented him to his great regret. But I've also come to believe, I might add, that if the shoe had been on the other foot, I think Jack would have treated Stan the same way Stan treated Jack. I don't believe it was a personal thing. It was just simply a situational, experiential thing. Hold on a thought. And the second arc of the book is also about bitterness, but from a totally different perspective, in a totally different way. Because that first arc is about a generation of men and women who believed that comics was a way station, that something else was coming along right afterward. And then they woke up at the age of 60 and they were still doing the same shit they did when they were 50. Okay. The difference between that and my generation is we knew going in that we loved the work so much that it was we were artisanal in our work as opposed to industrial. So that first generation was industrial, we were artisanal. I'll never forget being at Marvel and meeting Mike Esposito, who, most of you guys regard Ross Andru and Mike Esposito as hacks. And my experience is Mike Esposito and Ross Andru, they produced the best imitation EC Mad stuff in the early 50s. Their Wonder Woman stuff was my favorite shit when I was a kid. They were crazy-ass guys. And the single syllable fan coming out of Mike Esposito's lips was filled with such vitriol and bile and dismissal. The contempt that generation had for comics fandom cannot be overemphasized. It was astonishing. They fucking hated us, because all of us had started out as fans. Okay?
Well, and it wasn't valid work to them either.
No, they held it in contempt. And significantly. as big a dick as Gil was, and he was a dick, he was the only guy who was able to look past his own time and generation and acknowledge the value of other work. Anecdotally, I was at Marvel, and with Gil, when the pages started coming in of that Avengers annual that Michael Golden penciled that Armando Gil inked, and watching Gil go into a blind rage over the quality, the excellence, the absolute brilliance of this work cannot be overstated. It's my wife, she'll want to talk to you as well. You in Chicago, or you're on your next flight? Fantastic. I'm talking to a group of complete strangers and a couple of people I know, and I'm talking about myself. How, is that fabulous or what? I'm on a panel, you know. I'm alone. There's nobody here.
Hello.
Hey, hold on a second. Hold on a second. Say hi.
Hi.
How's that? You just had a room full of people say hi and wave at you.
Oh, hi. I'm waving back.
All right, of course you are. No FaceTiming for you. All right, sweetie. Have a safe flight and call me when you land, okay?
All right, then.
All right, honey. I love you madly.
Okay. I love you too.
All right, sweetie. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
I'm the luckiest motherfucker walking, baby. That acknowledgement of excellence cannot be overstated. And we did build bridges with some of those older guys who could share the love of the material with us. You know, Gil was one, Woody was another, you know. But there weren't a lot, you know. A lot of those guys just resented the fact that there were young people coming along. And what that resentment of on our generation's part emerged from when guys who were younger than us, some older, but they came in later, who arrived fully formed and willing and interested in doing superhero comic books. And we never recovered from that. We really didn't. You know, I mean, I can do superhero comics with a certain professional efficiency or proficiency, but it's not my first passion. You know, I like doing work that requires research. I like doing work that requires, you know, some scrap and swiping stuff. Last year I saw a musical on Broadway, which was just terrible. That should have been great, about Elizabeth Arden and Helena Rubinstein, about the wars between two makeup companies, starring two great actresses. And it started in 1935 and ended in 1965. And we walked out of there, both of us very disappointed. And I turned to my wife and I said, what this tells me is that I'm perfectly capable of faking a woman's outfit over a period of 40 fucking years, you know. And that's where I'm at. I like historical stuff. I like it drawing my world and the world that existed around it before. So, someone else. Yes?
You were telling a story the other day at a panel about Gil Kane watching a movie. You never finished it because the phone rang.
Okay. I went to work for Gil Kane when I was 18. And in those days before VH, I mean, you guys have a world that everything is on record. In those days, nothing. A friend of mine told a story about borrowing a movie camera so that he could film The Bride of Frankenstein, which was airing at 2 a.m. off his own television set. This before VHS. And, you know, he said, you know, go for it, Scott, you know. And I walked in and this guy, Gil said, we are stopping working this afternoon. Okay, whatever. And we sat down, and as I said, every one of us, all of us in those days, had a black and white portable Panasonic 9-inch TV set. They were yellow plastic. They were about the size of a bread box, like everything was in those days. And we had them bungee cabled or duct taped to our drawing tables, and he did as well. And he turned on the show. It was on Channel 5 in New York, and it was a movie called Cover Girl, starring Gene Kelly, Rita Hayworth, and Phil Silvers. And for the next 2 hours, Gil annotated the movie. He walked me through the movie, and it was like being given a new set of eyes to watch this picture. He explained the significance of Gene Kelly as a dancer, as opposed to Fred Astaire, the influence that Gene Kelly had on him, the way he depicted action, the way that they interacted as a trio. And it was the most illuminating experience that I'd had since I discovered comic books. That there was a way of seeing, that there was a way of perceiving, that there was a way of being inoculated by material that had a depth and a profundity, even in its superficiality, that was there waiting for me. And it was fucking exciting. It really was. It's just, it was like someone once reviewed a novel by a guy named Alan First that was like seeing Casablanca again for the first time. And that has been the defining aspect of my adult life, is the sensory experience provided by something that is as old as time and brand new to me. And just hearing this for the first time. And Gil Kane had that impact on me when I was a little boy. As an artist, he's no longer particularly an influence on me. But when I watched this 2-hour uncut video of interview taken with him about 2 months before he died, it scared the shit out of me to realize that I was literally a parrot for everything he believed and thought. That I am very much his living avatar in that way. And the difference is that unlike the men on whose shoulders I stand, as I say, I can write. Gil could never write. He could speak, he could write essay, but he could never write comics. His writing of comics was just awful. It was just shit. It was operatic junk. And he could never write human character. And I'm good at that. I really know that. And you know, the great irony is that almost all the criticism I received when I was working in Marvel, I beiged out of Marvel and DC effectively, so I don't regard them as clients in any way. So I can talk shit. Is that, you know, use their powers. And these powers are so fucking stupid. I find it harder and harder to be interested in stories about people with shit coming out of their eyes, you know, and lasers coming in, you know. I want human condition, you know. I was talking with an artist earlier today whose great skill set is human comedy. And he draws like a son of a bitch. He draws so well. And he's always put in a position of doing this usual superhero bombast. Because he's a lazy-ass motherfucker and he doesn't seek out other things to do. You know what I'm talking about. Don't mention the names. And just, you know, it's the price I've paid for making the decision to do whatever I fucking feel like is being marginal. You know, as I said, I am the most influential, invisible figure in comics. Because the people whose work my work has impacted on are people who became professionals, not the enthusiasts. Because the enthusiasts have an almost bullet point checklist of material, of the way they feel about work. You know, and Gil never could get past the formal nature. He had no idiosyncrasy. The work was not idiosyncratic at all. It was generic in every way. Generic guns, generic suits, generic cars, generic cities. And it's because he never learned to slow down and work a little bit slower and find an internal meaning to stuff that went beyond just the quick referent. I mean, Gil started his career imitating Jack, and he imitated Alex, and then he went back to imitating Jack. And I started out having no idea what I was doing. One of the reasons why I hold my 70s work in contempt is because I had no idea what I was doing. I was trying everything. I didn't arrive with anything to bring to the table. I got work under false pretenses. And when I finally found what I was doing, and that came after working away from comics for about a year and a half, I was overjoyed that I finally had a point of view. And I grabbed it and ran with it. And I ran it away from the marketplace. I ran it away from mainstream. Because I could not have used that skill set in the service of what Marvel and DC wanted. I had a violent discussion. We'd come to blows, but it was a spirited argument that I had with Jeanette Kahn after Flag broke, where she asked me why I didn't bring it to them, and I said, because you never would have published it. And she denied this. And I said, I stand by that. The only reason Flag was publishable in 1983 was because it was for a company with no history and no baggage. Marvel and DC could never have published such a book. You know, the way DC has betrayed Alan Moore's trust with Watchmen is a perfect indication of what that material, how the corporate structure, the corporate nature of the comic book business impacts on the stuff. Of course, that doesn't, of course, ignore the idea that Watchmen, if you read it closely, is an indictment of the work that it's inspired. You know, that it basically pisses all over comic books in every way, shape, and form. And instead of being read as a cautionary tale, it becomes a training manual. And in that way that 100 lesser, like as Damon Knight said about Alfred Besser's The Stars My Destination, 100 lesser novelists can make 100 lesser novels out of the things that Alfred Besser throws over his shoulder in the first 100 pages. You've got an entire talent pool of men and women who built careers creating edgy, gritty, nihilist material that owe everything to Alan Moore's dismissal of that very edginess. I find that fabulous. I truly do. But you know, it's your shit, not mine. You know, you read it as you will. One more? Come on. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you said you don't read comics now.
I don't.
You have in the past.
Oh, sure.
Besides Moore, did you like?
I loved what Darwin did with the Parker work.
Okay.
I truly did. The last book I read regularly was Scalped. I really love Scalped. I had a hard time getting used to Guerra's artwork. I found it, and I also the coloring of the book was terrible. But I thought the combination of Guerra's work, Guerra's graphic design with Jason's scripts, pretty amazing. And I liked everything. I just finished reading Cinema Purgatorio, and I thought it was okay but repetitious. I couldn't read anything else, the other features besides Alan and Kevin's. I love Alan and Kevin's stuff. I hated Prometheus. I just fucking hated Prometheus. Because it represents everything I hate about British comics, about the British idea of comics.
It's pretty.
Fuck you.
You don't like James Williams? You don't like
But,
James Williams?
what's that?
You don't like James
I love Jim. No, he has a career because of me. No, I introduced him to the people at DC. He was doing bondage comics when I met him many, many years ago. It's serious talk. When you run into Jim, ask him. Trust me, this is not a joke. I was at a WonderCon, when WonderCon was still in Oakland. And I said, you're too good to be doing this shit. And I forget what editor I introduced, and he started at DC immediately. You didn't know this?
No.
See, when people think what kind of asshole I am, you hear about this kind of shit, right?
That's
There
true.
you go, right?
That's the history you're talking about.
Seriously, that's the deal. We all, I mean, everybody gives a leg up, you know. I have my career because of Gil Kane, Neil Adams, Gray Morrow, Wallace Wood, and Joe Orlando. Those two guys, those five guys made the ladder and platform on which I was able to build my professional life. Okay? And I owe them everything. Everything.
Is this maybe a grenade? What about Neil?
I said Neil.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, Neil got me my first job in professional comics. I wasn't ready to do it, but he got it for me. He browbeat Murray Bolton up to giving me a job. It was terrible. It was awful. I got work under false pretenses until I was in my early 30s. You know, and then, you know, then I was able to do it. Okay? But, you know, my wife, who has never read a comic book in her life, often asks me why I don't write a novel, why I don't write a play. And the answer is that I'm a comic book man. That's me. I'm a comic book man. Not like those guys who sell comics in that schmucky television series. I'm a comic book man who sees things in the narrative patterns of panels on pages. And I like the language so much. I love the form so much. But why is comics called a medium? Because it's so rarely well done, you know. And you know, and I love the form so much. And to this day, I mean, every day, when I'm home working, I look at a little Kurtzman, a little Toth, a little Severin, a little Wood, you know, the old guys, you know. And I'm always looking. I mean, and I met, you know, I look at Eduardo Riso, Ferdinando Tacconi, a currently dead Italian artist. Look at that. He's just a comic book man. You know, they're just all these guys who inform me. I just bought this pile of Micheluzzi books. Attilio Micheluzzi, none of you. Attilio Micheluzzi was an Italian, Algerian of Italian ancestry who at the age of, in his late 40s, decided he hated being a lawyer and became a comic book artist. Fucking great. Oh, God. You know, whenever I hear guys talking about how they're influenced by Alex Toth, what they mean is they're drawing like Alex Toth, and that's not being influenced by Alex Toth. Attilio Micheluzzi was influenced by Alex Toth. Micheluzzi. Attilio Micheluzzi, dead at 55. Great historical talent, phenomenal, brilliant and witty. You know, there's a world of guys out there, men and women both. Joanne Scribner, okay. Gladys Parker, Ethel Hayes, just to mention a couple of women. You know, it's not just about superhero stuff. There's guys out there making, you know, humanity-filled imagery. Some of them are long dead, but some of them are still working today. Okay. okay? And not just punching the shit out of bad guys and shit coming out of your eyes. It's other stuff. Harvey Kurtzman, Johnny Craig, Will Elder, you know. As much as I despise Will Eisner on a personal level, I'm really glad he's dead. The work that he did in the 1940s and 50s, basically inventing the language we do, can never be undersold. Okay? So, that's it for me. Gentlemen, ladies, I have been so grateful for your time and your passion. That's no shit. I'm at 24:04, and the fun doesn't stop. And at the table, I'm a lot more fun than I am up here. These guys will tell you. I'm a fucking riot. Who's next?
Whoever shows up.
Fuck it, right? You know, please. I don't care. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
The band, The Clash.
What's that?
The band, The Clash, your favorite.
The band.
Yeah, mentioned, you said
The band. No, no, it's the band. Jenny Robbie Robertson and Garth Hudson are the only guys surviving. Manuel Danko and Elmer. We can talk about it.